It was the first great evil to befall Gondor, the disastrous civil war that will mark the beginning of its decline. Today on Tales of the Eldar we cover the fascinating and oft forgotten tale of the Kin-strife. The year was 2240 of the Third Age. The kingdom of Gondor had enjoyed a rather peaceful time ever since its 15th king, Hiarmendakil I, had conquered large parts of Harad and brought Gondor to the height of its power in 1050. For 2 centuries Gondor had been the primary power in the westlands of Middle-earth, so much so that it was considered that Gondorian children were playing with precious stones as toys. However, problems did arise. Hermendakil's son and successor to the throne, Atanatar II Alcarin, had been lazy and had cared little for the ruling of the realm. His own successor, Narmakil I, proved to be no better than his father, as did his younger brother Kalmakil. In this way it seemed that Gondor was destined to decline under bad leadership. However, Kalmakil's own son, Minalkar, was a man of great strength and vigor, after the manner of Hyarmendakil, whom he revealed. Already at the end of Atanatar's region, Minalkar's voice was listened to in the councils of the realm. Finally, in 1240, Narmakil, wishing to relieve himself of the cares of a king, made his nephew regent of Gondor and gave him the title of Karmakundo, Helm Guardian. Thereafter Minalcar ruled the realm, though he acted in the names of his father and uncle, save in the matters of war, over which he had complete authority. His chief concern was with the Northmen. Around the year 541, Gondor expanded its influence eastwards to the Sea of Rhun and claimed many lands. This happened after a war with the Easterlings that Gondor won. In saying this, the new provinces were part of the kingdom in name only, as the Dunedain did little to settle and garrison the largely open plains. Meanwhile, in those lands lived also the Northmen of Rovanion. They were descendants of the house of Hador, the house from where the majority of the Númenóreans and Dunedain came from. During the dark years of the Second Age, the Northmen had been enslaved by the Easterlings under Sauron's rule. But following Gondor's victory, they again grew in power, and by the 13th century had become mighty. But they were not a unified people, being instead ruled by many princes. Now news came to Minalcar that the Easterlings were once again preparing for war, and that some of the Northmen princes would ally with them in raiding Gondor's territories, either for power or for the spoils of war. Minalcar recognized that the Northmen could prove valuable allies and act as a buffer against any threat from the east. As such, in 1248 he led a great host eastwards with the intention of crushing the Easterlings and forming an alliance with the Northmen. In between Rovanion and the Sea of Rhun he defeated a large army of Easterlings and burned their encampments on the shore of the sea. As a result of this victory, Minalcar took the name Romendakil II, meaning East Victor. One Northman prince called Vidugarvia had joined Romendakil's forces and forged a close friendship with the regent. Vidugarvia called himself King of Rovanion, though his own realm lay in between Mirkwood and the river Kelduin. Upon returning home, Romendakil fortified the western shore of the Anduin up to the river Limlife. He built the great pillars of the Argonath, depicting his ancestors Isildur and Anarion. Romendakil showed great favor to Vidugarvia and his men, as he invited many of them into Gondor. Some Northmen even entered Gondor's armies and achieved high ranks. 2 years later, Romendakil sent his only son Valakar at the court of Vidugarvia as an ambassador to learn the customs of the Northmen. There, Valakar met Vidugarvia's daughter Vidumarvi, a fair and noble lady of high courage. The two fell in love and married. It is said in the peoples of Middle-earth that Romendakil gave his approval to the marriage because he wanted to avoid angering the Northmen and earning the enmity of Vidugarvia that a refusal of the marriage would have caused. The couple had a son in 1255, whom they named Vinifaya in the language of the Northmen. When Vinifaya was 5 years old, Romendakil recalled Valakar and his family back to Gondor. They were joined by a household of noble men and women from Rovanion. Upon arriving, Valakar gave to his son the name Eldakar, meaning Elfhelm in Sindarin, whilst Vidumarvi took the name Galadwen, Maiden of the Trees. At first they were gladly welcomed, but gradually tensions arose. With Narmakil aging fast and still not having any children, it became apparent to all the Dunedain that the crown would pass through Kalmakil's line, through Romendakil and Valakar, and eventually reach Eldakar. Some noblemen saw the Northmen as being inferior and thought that by mixing with lesser men the Dunedain blood would decline. It was also that a marriage of one of the king's heir to a woman of a different people and without any Númenórean blood had never occurred before, and thus caused great displeasure among the Gondorian nobility. In 1294 Narmakil died of old age, and the realm fell into the hands of Kalmakil for 10 more years, until his own death in 1304. It was actually during Kalmakil's rule that the Nazgûl returned to Middle-earth, and the Witch King founded the realm of Angmar in the north. Romendakil was now king, and would go on to rule Gondor relatively uneventfully. Meanwhile Eldakar grew into a handsome and valiant man, and showed no sign of aging more swiftly than his ancestors. He married a Dunedain woman, and had two sons, Ornendil and Aldamir, as well as an unnamed daughter. Nonetheless, the dissatisfaction of the noblemen steadily grew. Romendakil foreboded the troubles that were to come, and his heart grew heavy, as the end of his region and life were drawing nearer. Already men were looking forward to the ascension of Valakar, when Eldakar would become heir to the crown. Upon Romendakil's death in 3066, Valakar became king, though he did not have a queen, as Vidumarvi had died 22 years ago in 1344. During her stay in Gondor, she learned well the speech and manners of the Dunedain, but though she lived to a great age for one of the Northmen, she was still short-lived compared to the rest of her family. Valakar was a vigorous king, and Eldakar, now a man of great stature, adding to the wisdom of Gondor the fearless spirit of the Northmen. The high men were already looking with disdain at the Northmen among them. When Valakar grew old, there was open rebellion in the southern provinces, such as Lebanon. Therein were gathered many lords who declared that they would not accept as king a man of half different race born in another country. Vinifaya is his name, they said. Let him go back to the land where he belongs. Finally, in 1432, Valakar passed away at the age of 238. When Eldakar succeeded him, the unrest turned into open conflict as civil war broke out in Gondor. Many descendants of Atanatar II rose up against what they considered to be a lesser king. The greatest among them was Castamir, great-grandson of Kalimetar, the younger brother of Romendakil. He was not only Eldakar's second cousin, but had the greatest following out of all the rebels, as he had been the captain of the ships during Valakar's rule, and was supported by the people of the coast and in the havens of Pelargir and Umbar. Eldakar opposed the rebels to the end of his strength, and even managed to keep them at bay for 5 years. However, in 1437, Castamir's men came north, both by land and sea, and besieged Eldakar in his capital of Osgiliath. The rebels also laid siege to Minas Anor, that had been the summer residence of the king. The siege of Osgiliath was long and brutal, but eventually hunger and his enemy's numerical advantage drove Eldakar out. He and his family, as well as many of the Dunedain that supported him, managed to escape and fled into exile. King Arafor of Arnor was unable to send any help to Eldakar, as his own realm had been invaded by Angmar just 28 years ago, and was still recovering from the losses it suffered. During the battle, Osgiliath had been burned to the ground, and the Dome of Stars that housed the Palantir had been destroyed. The stone fell into the Anduin and was lost. The slaughter and destruction that Castamir brought far exceeded the needs of war. Ornendil, Eldakar's first son, had been captured, and Castamir slew him, proving his cruelty and malice. At the same time, Minasanor capitulated, and those Dunedain begrudgingly accepted Castamir's rule. With Gondor now under his control, Castamir usurped the throne and declared himself king. As for Eldakar, he fled north to his mother's kin in Rovanion, where he was gladly received. His grandfather, Vidugarvia, would have died long ago, but the Northmen were now ruled by a new king, and given that we know Vidumarvi wasn't Vidugarvia's only child, that means that the new king would have been related to Eldakar. Meanwhile, in Gondor, Castamir ruled with an iron fist and showed his true face. He was a cruel and proud man, as he had already proven during his sacking of Osgiliath. Castamir also cared little about Gondor's heartland and outer provinces, giving all of his attention towards the ships and the coast, so much so that he intended to make Pelargir the new capital of the realm. Many, especially in Anorian and Ithilien, were now disgusted by the new king and longed for the return of the true heir of Anarion. This sentiment was shared even among Castamir's own ranks, and the coalition that had brought down Eldacar was beginning to fall apart as the Dunedain were journeying to Rovanion and entering in Eldacar's service. After 10 years in exile, Eldacar, believing that now he had enough supporters and that Gondor was tired of Castamir's rule, gathered a great army of both loyalists and Northmen and headed south. As news of his coming spread out, the people of Ithilien, Anorian, and Calenarfron rebelled against the usurper. Castamir and his followers, that were still loyal to him, headed south to Lebanon, and there gathered their forces. Eldakar's army entered Osgiliath and raised even more support. At the crossings of the river Erui, halfway between Minas Anor and Pelargir, the two forces met in battle, a battle which saw most of Gondor's best blood spilled. The pivotal moment of the battle, however, came when Eldakar slew Castamir in single combat, proving once and for all that he was in no way a lesser king. The tyrant that had brought so much suffering to the kingdom was finally gone, but the battle did not end the war. The sons of Castamir took up the leadership of the rebels and retreated south towards Pelargir, closely pursued by Eldakar's army. There they held out long, as Eldakar had few ships of his own to fully besiege them. In early 4048, the sons of Castamir gathered all their followers, and with the fleet that had been loyal to their father, they set sail for the south to the haven of Umbar. Upon arriving, they took control of the city and declared the formation of an independent lordship and a refuge for all the enemies of Gondor. Eldakar, now the rightful and undisputed king, began to reorganize his realm. The blood of many noble houses intermingled with that of lesser men, as many pure-blooded Dunedain had fallen during the war, and now more and more Northmen were settling in Gondor. This mingling did not hasten the waning of the Númenóreans, as Castamir and his men had feared, but the waning still proceeded, little by little, as it had before. The loss of Umbar broke Gondor's power over the Haradrim, and with its fleet now having defected, it was no longer a naval power. The sons of Castamir took Haradrim wives and formed an alliance with the kings of Nir-Harad, who had been tributary to Gondor for nearly 400 years. After the Kin-strife, Eldakar and his successors became watchful and jealous of their nearer kin. Some of those relatives renounced their right to the throne and took wives of non-Númenórean blood, whilst others headed to Umbar and joined the corsairs. Eldakar would die at the age of 235, just 2 years younger than his father. He was succeeded by his second son, Aldamir. The sons and later heirs of Castamir would continuously make war upon Gondor. Aldamir and his descendants would battle them in a back-and-forth war that would last centuries. In 1810, King Telumetar Umbardakil retakes Umbar and wipes out the house of Castamir the usurper. Even so, the memory of the Kin-strife persists. In 2050, the childless King Earnur disappears in Minas Morgul after accepting the Witch King's challenge. With no proper heir, the Council of Gondor was reluctant to choose a king, as they feared another civil war. As such, the stewards came to rule the kingdom as a middle ground until Aragorn's ascension to the throne. It was also Aragorn who finally subdued the corsairs of Umbar and brought the dark legacy of Castamir the Usurper to an end. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting. The Kin-strife is one of the most forgotten parts of Gondor's history, which is really a shame, considering that it's one of the most darker and realistic events of the Third Age. Anyway, if you're wondering where I got all the little details, they come from Peoples of Middle-earth, the 12th volume of the History of Middle-earth, a book filled with small details.